Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Mita, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andrea. I'm excited for our conversation.
Mita, I absolutely love what you do. You are on a mission to make our workplaces inclusive. You are a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author. You're on the Thinkers 50 radar list, and you are a contributing writer to Harvard Business Review. Before we dive into the topic of inclusion within the workplace, can you tell us about the moments in your childhood that shaped your passion for what you do today?
Gosh, where do I begin? So many moments. I talk a lot about my origin story. For anyone who's a Marvel fan, I have an 11-year-old son. I'm rediscovering the Marvel universe. But my origin story is I am the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised in the US with my younger brother. We grew up mostly in Massachusetts, outside of Boston. And I always talk about the fact that I grew up in a time and a place where it was not cool to be Indian. No matter who you are, I think you can identify with that statement of feeling like you don't belong. And I think we talk a lot about inclusion, but we don't talk about exclusion. And for me, I was the funny looking, dark skinned girl with the long, funny looking braid whose parents spoke funny English until it wasn't funny anymore. And I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically, by my peers. It was clear to me that I did not belong in our community, but also I didn't see myself reflected in the greater world. I didn't grow up in an Instagram era. I was looking at billboards and movies and magazines and walking down the grocery aisle thinking, why don't I see more people who look like me? Who gets to decide? Who holds the power of the pen? Who decides whose stories matters and whose stories don't matter? And so from a young age, that really drove me, like all of those experiences, to think about, I want to live in a world where I see myself reflected and others reflected.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I can imagine it must have been so challenging as a kid to experience everything that you have experienced. And then some of those experiences continued on into your working life.
I never imagined that the bullies from the schoolyards and the classrooms would follow me into corporate America. I never imagined that. I grew up with a tiger dad, rest in peace. Lost my dad suddenly a few years ago, but he used to always say, work hard, keep your head down, and you will be recognized. And that just isn't true in corporate America. I thought that it was merit-based, based on your talent, based on your expertise, based on the impact we make. And we know that's not true for everybody. And so that to me was honestly really shocking, because I had always been the student who had gotten the A pluses and extra credit. And I thought that's how corporate America worked. That's not how it works. And so I was really sort of just in shock that this was happening to me all over again. And then I think about Taylor Swift. My daughter's a big fan of Taylor Swift, and she has a song called Antihero, and there's a lyric in it that says, hi, it's me. I'm the problem, it's me. And for so long in my career, I felt that way. It must be me, I'm the problem. Because wherever I go, I'm being passed up for promotions, I'm putting points on the board, but people aren't giving me the feedback. I'm being bullied, I'm being targeted. It was like being in school again. But then I recognized that I was entering a world of work, systems and processes that were put into place for someone who didn't look like me. And so that's the recognition I've come to. It's that I'm not the problem. And I was entering a world of work that wasn't built for someone like me.
As I'm listening to your story, both at a young age and while you were working within corporate America, what I see is these experiences were almost taking away the joy that you can experience in life in all its beauty. And I was curious to get your views on what role you believe joy plays in the context of inclusive cultures within organizations and society at large.
I don't know how you separate the two. When I feel that I am included in my workplace, I feel valued. I feel seen. I feel recognized. My contributions matter. Most of us go to work to get a paycheck, and some of us have found our purpose, but we want to go to work and feel valuable. But imagine every day if your boss, your colleagues, your team, the environment is telling you you're not valuable, you don't matter, you shouldn't be here, you're not being included. There's nothing faster to kill the joy of working than that, right? And imagine how joyful it is. Imagine if you feel like people value what you say, they want you in meetings, they hired you for your expertise, you're here to make a difference. How much joy that brings, not just to you, but to the organization. Because if I can unlock my potential, I'm certainly going to unlock the organization's potential as well.
Absolutely. And when we talk about some of the joyful moments in your career, you often refer to signing Viola Davis while you were working at Unilever. Can you tell us more about that and why you see it as one of the key highlights of your career?
It goes back to inclusion being a driver of the business. So I'm running this portfolio that's in decline. And one of the biggest selling products they have is the cocoa butter lotion. And if you look at those numbers, who do you think is buying the cocoa butter lotion in the US? Predominantly African American and Black households. And so, again, it's a lesson of who do we ignore and who do we decide that we want to speak to? And so, signing Viola Davis was an absolute career high because she, continues to be an incredible star. And at the time, her star continued to be on the rise, amazing spokesperson, but also that was one of the first products she used in her household. She actually shared a story with me on film saying Vaseline was one of the first words she learned to spell. She remembered the products in her home. And so it was an important lesson to say, again, who are we ignoring and who are we selling to? And to anyone right now who's listening who says there's no growth to be had, it's a really tough market right now, I'm going to ask you, what communities are you leaving behind? And really thinking about how your products and services can be enhancing and delighting individuals that you had ignored.
On that topic, I want to talk about your fantastic book,
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Reimagining Inclusion. I
Yes.
absolutely love it.
Oh,
And
thank you so much.
congratulations. And I know it came out in October, so a
Yes.
big win for the accolades that you've received. And it's really a wonderful book. You speak in the book about debunking 13 myths to transform organizations. Can you please share with us a few of the myths that you think would be worthwhile to share with our audience?
Well, first of all, thank you for reading the book. Time is a precious commodity, and I appreciate you spreading awareness about it. I wrote the book because I wanted to say the quiet parts out loud of what holds us back from making meaningful progress. It reminded me of the bedtime stories I tell my children at night. And I thought, what are the stories we tell ourselves at work that just aren't true? So there's 13 myths. My son said to me, "Why 13, Mom?" I said, "It's my lucky number. There's no more science behind it than that." And every myth, as you know, having read the book, there is a title that's provocative intentionally and a powerful story. And then I debunk the myth and I try to leave very practical tips on how individuals can show up and do better and be better at work. I'll give you a sneak preview for those listening. One of the myths is I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good. I'll say that again. I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good. Have you ever heard anyone say, I'm all for non diverse talent as long as they're good? Have you ever heard anyone say that as well? We protect the a-holes because our businesses wouldn't run without them. We protect the a-holes because our businesses wouldn't run without them. And it's so fascinating in my time working with so many leaders. It doesn't matter sometimes how much feedback we get on how Mita has hurt and harmed people. We're willing to have Mita stay while her team turns over and over again. And the loss of productivity and the cost to the company is just astounding to me, why we don't say goodbye to toxic leaders sooner. And so that's what that myth goes after. And then one more just for fun. Why are you asking for a raise? You and your husband make more than enough money. Why are you asking for a raise? You and your husband make more than enough money. And that myth really speaks to the heart of that white women and women of color often do negotiate. There's a myth that we don't negotiate. We often do negotiate, but oftentimes when we negotiate, it's received with a dismissal, we're being gaslit, we're being minimized. That's a little preview.
Wonderful. And I was wondering if I could talk about one of the myths, myth 9, which says DI efforts don't benefit me. My voice as a white man doesn't count anymore. Can you talk more about that?
So I think there's two sides to this equation. I have many white men who have been former bosses, career sponsors, advocates, allies, friends for me who have quietly said to me, these efforts don't include me, they don't matter. I think it's really important in our workplaces that we recognize that the future of work and the world of work cannot change without white men and them having a seat at the table. When people ask questions that they don't understand the answer to, for us to show kindness and empathy to help educate. Now, I'm not saying that that means you can ask the same question over and over again. You cannot do your own research, that you can consistently put the burden on me as a woman of color. But what I am saying, Dr. Andrea, is I hope that there would be more kindness and empathy and compassion in our workplaces, which seems to be missing. And also for white men to recognize, many, CEO founders who I work with who are white men, that this is a part of their legacy. And this is a part of how they want to leave their teams and their workplaces and the future of work. Like, how powerful is that? Because if you are the leader who has actually promoted women faster than anyone else and changed the composition of your C-suite, that's a reflection of your leadership and your leadership legacy. And so I often ask people to think about it that way. And then finally, there's nothing like the heart. There's the head and the heart, right? There's the data, but the heart. Everyone, I promise you, has a connection to this work, whether they're ready to admit it or not. Particularly for men in positions of power, to think about their daughters, their nieces, their cousins, their sisters. Is this the world of work they would want for them? They would want for them to enter? No, of course not, right? They would want it to be fair and equitable for them and for them to be judged on their talent and expertise. And I think if you position it personally to people, they also start to think about it that way. I would never want my daughter to be treated this way in the workplace ever. And I'm going to do something to make sure that doesn't happen and change it.
Beautiful. And you mentioned the future of work, and there's also myths around that, myth 13 in your book. Can you talk a little bit more about that as well, please?
Yes, we can work from home now. The future of work is inclusive, right? Check the box. I think, gosh, what year are we in? 2024? I can't remember. But, even post the pandemic, we fell into hybrid remote work, and now we're 5 days back. Some people are remote, some people are going 2 days, 3 days. I don't think we ever figured out the infrastructure or the technology. Do you think about when you're hosting a meeting and half the people are in the room and half the people are remote? Are you thinking about the technology you're using and how you're making sure that everyone is being seen and everyone can speak up and they're being listened to? Are you thinking about when you have some people coming into the office and some people are remote, who's getting more FaceTime and access? And what's very interesting is I love meeting in person. I think that's important, gathering community conversation. So I am someone who believes you should get together in person as well. But it's interesting that there's actually something so intimate about this format and being on camera with somebody. There's such intimacy over Zoom and Teams or however you're meeting. Like, you normally would never sit this close to somebody, right? And there's this is such intentionality when you're together on screen. So I also think it's a wonderful way to build relationships. And quite frankly, for more junior individuals, you're probably getting access to senior leaders that you wouldn't have in the old ways of working. What do I mean by that? The CEO comes by at 10 a.m. every morning to grab her coffee between 10 and 10:30, and people are kind of circling, waiting to see her so they can get their 5 minutes. But now, because of the way we work, and many companies are hybrid, you likely could get a meeting with the CEO on Zoom, and you likely will be in a meeting with her on Zoom. And that's a very different way of working than 5 years ago.
I fully agree. You also mentioned in your book diversity propping and diversity dressing.
Diversity dressing is the check the box initiatives, the shortcut, the quick fixes companies and brands might take. So an example I include is a beauty brand, because I'm a beauty obsessive, that I'm following on Instagram, has an image of a Black woman with stunning makeup on. And I think to myself, well, if it's going to work on her skin, it's going to work on mine. I want that eyeshadow, right? So then I go investigate the brand. Oh, they actually don't sell the eyeshadow or the lipstick. It's a beauty brand that has a very limited range of shades. And I'm like, well, why do you have the picture up there? That's diversity dressing, so that you are projecting an image that's likely not the reality. And oh, by the way, unfortunately, we do this from an employer brand recruiting perspective. You might use my image over and over again, and I no longer work at the company. Like, I'm not your stock photo, right? But then you sort of project, right? So you have to be careful, because employees are, you know, we're smart. We're going to do our research, and we're going to say, actually, like, that isn't the diversity or representation you have in the company. But you have all these pictures. Diversity dressing, diversity propping is a story I share in Reimagine Inclusion. Another term I coined is that I'm early in my marketing career, and I get an invite from a VP for a brand I don't work on, but I'm very excited. And I walk into this large conference room of about, I don't know, a dozen people. And it's very clear to me why I've been invited, because I'm the only non white individual who has walked into that room. Everybody else identifies as white, and they're creating a line targeted toward women of color. So in that case, I feel like I'm being tokenized, and I'm being used as a prop to say, okay, we covered our bases because Mita's a woman of color and she's in the room. Now imagine the pressure that puts on me. I don't speak for all women of color, but imagine you've tokenized me. It's actually not that you've invited me for my marketing genius and expertise. You've invited me to check the box. Now, how different would that conversation have been is if someone sat with me and said, you know, you're really great at marketing, really great at storytelling. I have this assignment I'd like for you to consider to come and join. And I also want you to know we're working on diversity representation. I'm actually actively looking at agencies to bring on who can help us with this, consultants, but I want you to know this is why I'm inviting you. And I'm not surprised then when I walk into the room.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think the reality is that there's so many nuances and so many complexities when it comes to inclusion within organization, within our societies. And I was wondering, what would be specific recommendations that you would have for some leaders that would really want to make sure that they're heading in the right direction? Are there specific key actions? And I know a lot of the details are outlined in your book, but for the audience that is listening today, what would be the top three things that they need to pay attention to really create that inclusive workplace for everybody?
I would start with what gets measured gets done. And so you don't need to be measuring 1,000 things, but start by measuring a few things. What does gender representation look like? What does it look like in terms of women of color and engineering? Like, think about different things, because if you can measure a few things and measure them consistently and have some wins, you'll start measuring more things. People will get really excited about it. I think that's really important. I think the second piece of advice I'll offer is looking at some of your policies that are in place. One that I'm particularly interested in is parental leave, and how we cannot build an inclusive world of work for mothers without fathers, and really thinking about, are policies equitable? And I talk about in Reimagine Inclusion, it's not just about the leave. It's about the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood premium, and how women and men are treated differently when they become parents. Certainly, it's happened to me. So I think that's really important. And I think the last piece, my advice for leaders right now doing this work, it's don't back down. I know the DE&I backlash is real from a US perspective, but educate ourselves. There's no federal or national legislation right now that is stopping companies from doing DE&I work. And inclusion is a competitive advantage. If you don't think about it that way, you will be left behind. I mean, right now, 40% of individuals in the US identify as non-white, and that number is rapidly changing. Procter and Gamble gives us one figure that says $5 trillion of spending power with the multicultural consumer. That doesn't include veterans, individuals with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community, and more. And so you're thinking, wow, like, that is a driver of the business. You know, I'm just giving you two stats right there. And so how can you not think that that's going to be a competitive advantage? How can you not?
Fully agree. And as you mentioned, and as we're seeing, many leaders and many organizations are truly heading in the right directions. It's not a perfect world out there, clearly, but there have been positive evolutions that are encouraging. So as you reflect on your journey and what you have experienced and think about your kids, what have you learned along the way, and how are they experiencing the world as it is today? And what advice would you have for parents that could help their children better navigate with more joy the challenges that we still have, unfortunately, in our society?
I love that question. This is why I do this work. I do this work for my children, all of our children. I want the world of work to be different than when I entered it, and I'm committed to doing that. And also, in a time and an environment where many individuals are being hurt and harmed, when they ask me, Mom, what did you do during this time? I want to say, this is what I was doing during this time, right? That is incredibly important to me. For parents listening, I'm on the same journey as you are. I'm on the journey to raise kind and inclusive human beings. Inclusion doesn't start at our conference room tables, it starts at our kitchen tables. And so I ask you to think about the following: whether you have children or you have little people in your life, watch for the language you use. Mita is weird, funny, stupid, crazy, lazy, strange, odd, smells funny. Seems innocent, right? But what I would argue is that becomes othering and it becomes stereotyping and the gateway to hate. And so when you hear your children using that language, stop them. Like, tell me more. Why is Mita weird? I don't think she's very weird. Maybe we should have her over for a play date, right? It starts at our kitchen tables, it starts in our communities. These are our future leaders, right? These are our future leaders. And so, how we talk about lived experiences that are different than our own, how we help give them access to lived experiences that are different than their own, how we help them build empathy. This is all the foundational work for when they do enter the workforce someday.
And it's also about embracing curiosity. Would you agree? It's how do we fuel that curiosity about humans to actually and nurture it in a beautiful way rather than resist someone that may be different, right? And the differences are just like so many, but let's just focus and embrace that curiosity with joy and see our shared humanity in the process, right?
Absolutely. And there's the balance to curiosity because guess what? Google's your best friend. I'm on a journey, I say, to be an ally to the Black community. There's no allyship card. Only my Black friends and colleagues can tell you if I'm showing up for them. If I have curiosity about the challenges that community is facing, I can educate myself. I can use Google. I can read. I can watch film. I can watch TV. Now, that's not my only source of education. I have to be building cross cultural relationships consistently. And then when you have safe relationships where there's psychological safety and a foundation of trust, I can perhaps ask more questions, but that curiosity certainly comes with a balance, I would say.
And if you are to write a letter for future generations, let's say 100 years from now, about the importance of diversity and inclusion, what message would you want them to read?
I hope I don't have to write a letter because I hope this is something we're not talking about anymore. That's actually my hope. My hope is I'm out of a job. My hope is not because my job has been canceled or deleted because people don't think this work is important or it's uncomfortable. I hope my job no longer exists because everyone is just thinking about it's everyone's job to think about how you build a more inclusive culture at work. And so I hope I don't have to write a letter. I hope this is not even a topic of conversation in 100 years.
I hope so too. And when we're thinking about some statistics or even the gaps that exist at different levels in our society, it's almost shocking to think that certain things have not evolved at all, or we have not necessarily even reached parity in terms of salaries between men and women. And when you're thinking back in history and you're like, wow, why is it taking it so long? What are some key measures that you believe we need to take as a society to actually accelerate the positive change, the positive impact that we can make collectively so we can actually bring greater joy and harmony in this world?
Well, I'll talk again about the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood premium. Not all women want to become mothers, nor will they become mothers. I talk about that in the book. But from my experience as a mother, I never realized that there would be a cost to my career for being a mother. I never realized that. But as soon as I became a mother, my husband, we have two children together, also working, the fatherhood premium. For each child we've had together, he has gotten more promotions, more money. Now, this is statistically proven out. I include the research in the book, but also he just seems to attract more money, right? Whereas I'm a disheveled mess. Is she committed? Is she distracted? Who's watching her kids? Why is she here? Why isn't she home with her kids? Should she be part-time? Should she be, I mean, the questions I receive, my husband has never received any of those questions. But also for the time that I have taken to care for my children, I've also been penalized in terms of my salary, right? So interesting to think about from a company perspective, to look at mothers and fathers and what kind of gap there are. If we have had similar experiences, similar roles, am I suddenly being paid less because I've gone out on leave, maybe 3 or 4 times, depending on how many children I've had? So those are some of the fundamental ways we can start. And that actually, where does that come from? That bias comes from, what we expect mothers to do versus fathers, women versus men, how we've been raised, the stereotypes we have about what women should do versus men. And so that's actually, it all goes back to the stereotypes and bias and how it shows up into pay, how it shows up into the pay between, Mita and John, and then how it keeps, you just sort of keep zooming out. And then you're looking at how, not just in the company, but the industry and in the aggregate, the gap between men and women when it comes to pay.
And when you look beyond your professional endeavors, how do you personally cultivate joy and find moments of inspiration in everyday life?
Well, I love to write a lot, so that's a really big outlet. Writing brings me a lot of joy. Spending time with my kids brings me joy. My husband, my mom, my brother, my family, my nieces, nephew, like all of those things. Community and conversation brings me a lot of joy. And gratitude, right? I don't believe that you can have success without gratitude. And so all of those things bring me a lot of joy. And life is too short. There are moments of joy everywhere if we just stop to look for them.
What is one takeaway that you hope our listeners will gain from our conversation today? And what should they move forward with in terms of applying key insights, key wisdoms into their lives?
Well, I hope you'll go check out my new book, Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace. You can find it on Amazon or at your favorite local bookstore. But what I would say is, there's lots of tools I leave in Reimagine Inclusion. But if there's one piece of advice I can leave to listeners today is be the reason someone feels included at work tomorrow. Be the reason. Of course, we all want to be included at work, but are you observing what's happening with your teammates, colleagues, your boss? Are you actively trying to help someone feel like they belong here and they're part of the team? And imagine if each of us did that for someone else. I believe our workplaces would look a lot different than they are today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mita, for your time today. I'm very grateful for everything you have shared. And I look forward to staying in touch and learning more about the wonderful things that you're doing.
Thanks so much for having me on.